B1 brothers and sisters, welcome to Blacklogic. Today, I have a special guest, my brother Afro Elite. Today, we'll be breaking down how Asian Americans benefit more from affirmative action than foundational Black Americans.
Thank you, Blacklogic. I appreciate you having me here. This is going to be a very important topic because a lot of narratives have been put on the fact that Asian Americans are held back because of Black Americans, because of foundational Black Americans.
Right.
And actually, the total opposite is the truth. Actually, it's our work that's promoting them, and it's our work that's being suppressed as they are the model minority. So I'm glad that I'm here. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm glad to be here so we can really dispel this myth and this misnomer that foundational Black Americans are holding back any other group, and that these groups are not benefiting from the foundations and the benefits and programs that we set forth.
My pleasure, brother. Thank you for coming on. So let's jump right into this. This is a Supreme Court ruling that was proposed last year, October. And this is just a small segment within the Supreme Court ruling that states that the last stage of Harvard's admission process, called the LOP, winnows the list of tentatively admitted students to arrive at the final class. Applicants that Harvard considering cutting at the stage are placed on the LOP list, which contains only 4 pieces of information. These are the students that will be getting accepted: legacy status, recruited athlete status, financial aid eligibility, and race. So in Harvard, as well as other Ivy League schools admission process, race is a determining tip for a significant percentage of all admitting Black Americans and Hispanic applicants. And what's important about this is this was proposed by, I believe, a particular guy and students that they believe they were being discriminated upon based upon affirmative action when they consider of Black Americans and then grouped with Hispanic Americans. What are your thoughts on that, Afro?
Well, the thing is that white supremacy, the system of white supremacy that we live in, put the stigma that Black students, particularly foundational Black American students, are less qualified than everybody else. We are always the slowest, and the only way we get to be in these things are because of affirmative action and programs like that. And it's almost like a participation trophy. You're not getting a trophy because you deserve a trophy. You're getting a trophy just because we got to kind of give you one.
Just because you're Black.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the narrative that has been around affirmative action, despite the fact that statistics have shown that affirmative action, we are not the biggest beneficiaries or even the second bigger beneficiaries. We're actually pushed to the back of the line when it comes to the benefits from affirmative action. But the Asian community has really acquiesced to the systemic narratives of white supremacy. So they believe in their mind that Black students are lesser than themselves. So in their mind, if they got an A on a test and a Black student got an A on the test, the Black student got an A because the teacher curved the grade. They view it in that point of view. They grow up teaching their kids that. So they grow up with that point of view. They grow up looking at the worst of the worst representations of Black society and saying this is how they really are. This is their representation. They believe that the lie that the dominant society has taught really America, that they are the model minority. So when they see themselves on an even playing field with Black people, they have to calculate that how can this Black person be as smart as me, get accepted to the same college that I'm accepted to. That's the same way you see a lot of these Karens not letting people into their apartment complexes because they believe, like, I live here, I'm white, I live here. How you're a Black person, you're not supposed to live where I live. You
can't afford
you're
where
not
I live
supposed to be there with me. That's how they're seeing it. So they're looking at affirmative action like that's the only way you get to be on my level because you're being helped to be here because I'm better than you.
Absolutely. And the notion that Asian Americans are being denied admission to Ivy League schools due to affirmative action policies benefiting Black Americans is a narrative propagated by white power structures who oppose affirmative action, first and foremost, because this particular argument that surrounded the Supreme Court ruling or putting down this sort of affirmative action in education, which aims to promote, diversity, so to speak, because Black Americans we never really benefited in the first place. So when I look at it, Asian Americans allege difficulties in gaining admission to these prestigious universities, even though they have faced this, discrimination in the Exclusionary Act, the Chinese Exclusionary Act, internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. Asian Americans somehow have always achieved what we're like to believe these educational success, and they will also group in their facing these stereotypes, and as you stated, being the model minority, because Black Americans, on the other hand, have historically experienced deep entrenched racism, including slavery, segregation, Jim Crow, Reconstruction, redlining, all the particular massacres that our people have been through, sinking of our towns and destroying the many Black Wall Streets, and of course, the ongoing systemic discrimination that we face today. The effects of historical racism have been persuasive in various aspects of our lives, including education, right? Which is the main topic of today. Because Black students often face disparities in access to quality education, resources, opportunities that contributes to the achievement gap between all these so-called racial ethnic groups. Because the evidence is out here that a lot of Asian Americans are getting accepted to these colleges. So when I look at the numbers, this is coming from NBC. It states that a breakdown class released by the university last week, Harvard revealed that 30% of admitted applicants are Asian Americans. So this narrative that because of affirmative action, Blacks are being accepted higher than Asian American is a narrative that has been propelled by the white power structure, the system of white supremacy. And they have these so-called Asian shields that speak for them, because we're kind of familiar with that very famous Asian guy that was on NBC that kind of did this interview stating that this is better for all students, not just Black or Asian students. Are you familiar with that as well?
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to get right into that video so the people can see exactly what we're referring to.
Alex Shea, prospective Brown University student. I know, Alex, you're on the other side of this. You were hoping that the Supreme Court would move in the direction that it did today. Why do you think that this is the right way to move forward on this?
Right. Well, I think this is a win for students all across America, because we shouldn't be judging students based on their race when we're deciding who gets into what schools. I think that I believe that your previous guest is mistaken in this regard, because I think that by getting rid of affirmative action, now we look at the individual student and what they've accomplished, and we can look at what barriers they've overcome. But we view them as an individual first and foremost, as opposed to just viewing them as a blob in an amorphous larger racial group, as opposed to just under this new system, we get to view students for who they are as individuals. And I think that's a much better way to go forward on this topic.
I know you want to chime in on that. So
well, okay, here's the thing. This really stems from the very inaccurate depiction of what affirmative action is in the first place. If we go back to the historical sense of why affirmative action needed to be created or was created in the first place, is because and we'll just talk about the schools, because there's affirmative action for employment, but we'll focus on the schools. It's because of the fact that there were Black students who were actually qualified for these universities and were just discriminated purely off the fact that they were Black. These universities have pretty much 100% non-Black people. No Black people were pretty much allowed in these schools. So that's where the quota comes in when it comes to affirmative action, to say qualified Black people. You have to admit a certain amount of qualified Black people. That's the way affirmative action works. Their inaccurate depiction of affirmative action is, I say I'm Black, I get in. I don't need any other qualifications. I don't need to meet any other qualifications.
I'm just Black.
Anything be damned. I get to get in because I'm Black. So that's just an inaccurate adaptation of what affirmative action is in the very first place.
I mean, when I think about affirmative action, we have to understand that these policies that were implemented to address, historical disadvantages and promote equality in education and employment opportunities, we know, for Black people. That's what essentially we was created for. But if we look at, the statistics, they will reveal what I would like to believe, like an intriguing pattern, that Asian Americans often benefit more from these policies compared to foundational Black Americans. And we're kind of getting to the math, but I'm gonna allow this video just kind of play a little bit more. You have another comment?
No, you can play it.
Okay.
You heard Booby's point there, though, that this now forces students, if they want the school to take into account race in some fashion or form, that they're going to have to now write about this.
Right. Well, I think that fundamentally, right, for most people, race is just a characteristic. It's sort of the way that your body manifests. I think that for some students that does play a role in how they experience the world, but for some students it doesn't. And I think that allowing them that option to express that in an essay, for instance, affords much more freedom, because race doesn't affect everybody the same way. And to just have a blanket policy where everybody's race is considered no matter what, I don't think that's appropriate, because it impacts different people in different ways. I find that a lot of these arguments oftentimes in favor of affirmative action are somewhat incongruous, because I've heard a lot of people that say, like, hey, affirmative action, it's a good way to overcome past discrimination. But in my experience, as an Asian American, I'm not exactly sure how that works for me, because it's much more difficult for Asian Americans to gain admittance to schools than for white students, for instance. And I don't think that you'll see in the past any instance of Asians discriminating against whites. So for me, that sort of just falls flat. I'm going to Brown next year, and I'm happy that the admissions officers at Brown took me for whatever reason. But it does make me feel a little bit uncomfortable knowing that in that admissions office, when they were deciding whether they were going to accept me, reject me, that they might have been considering my race, because I think that that's not something that I can control or that anyone can control. And I think that it's unfair to judge someone based on that when there are really...
I know there's so much to unpack there, because I wanted to say that if they didn't consider race, he probably wouldn't even enter it. He wouldn't even have an opportunity to be part of the college. So race does play a significant role in the admittance of non-white people.
Yes, I agree. And he's aware of that. And he really just told on himself. He really just admitted that. And all of I think the organization, the Asians who are a part of that organization who goes against affirmative action, they're all aware of that. They're all aware of the fact that their race is looked at less, than they have less of a chance than their white counterparts. They are all aware of that. But the thing is that instead of going for the white power structure, they go for the Black percentage, because they're like, okay, well, the scraps that Black people get, let's take those too. We can get those. We don't want to say, okay, look at how the white acceptance rate and look at the Asian acceptance rate, and then look at the merit in numbers, and we can see racism against us by the white power structure. They don't challenge that. They're going to say, well, the Black people shouldn't get it, so we can get the percentage that they get, that they feel that they would get. So he just admitted that. A lot of them, without these benefits and without these programs, a lot of them would not have gotten in. Now, and another thing I want to say as well, another thing I would like to add, race plays a factor in a lot of different circumstances in a lot of different ways.
Absolutely.
Race isn't just, oh, I'm Black, I should get. That's not how it should be looked at. Race plays a factor in the environment that you grew up. Race plays a factor in how you were treated when you were in school. Race plays a factor into your economic status. Race plays a factor into what colleges you would even try to apply to. Race plays a factor into the rate of success that you're going to be when you leave college. Race plays a factor into all of those things. So for him to say, well, yeah, race doesn't affect me the same way it affects a Black person. Yeah, you mean you're not a target the way the Black people are.
That's what I say. He's right.
Really what he means.
Right. So, I mean, when we get into, the statistics, because there's a lot of studies hovering around, but as I showed before, NBC even had numbers that, Asian Americans, they tend to have higher acceptance rates than, in some regards, white people, considering the population of America, especially when you come to these so-called Ivy League or top-tier schools, and they receive more admission offers. Of course, within the Black community, we know that we are, suppressed and oppressed, and that we're not going to have the same numbers of admissions, even though our merit, because that's their key word, right? Our merit is on the same scholastic levels. So when I look at articles like this, and I see Asian Americans hold mixed views around affirmative action, and I can scroll down here a little bit, and we can get into the weeds, but it states here that 3/4 of all Asian adults, 76% say race or ethnicity should not factor into college admission or decisions, which is a 1,000% huge fat lie. Because when I go to AAPIdata.com, it tells me that from Koreans, Indians, Filipinos, Vietnamese, Japanese, and Chinese, that majority of them favor affirmative action. Favoring affirmative action is in blue, opposing affirmative action is in orange, and then unknown or don't know is depicted in gray. So vast majority of Asian Americans do favor affirmative action. So when we see headlines like this, or we see statistics within, this is Pew Research, one of the websites that a lot of people use for their information, this is somewhat flawed on a very large level. So we can't always be keyed into the numeric value and percentages that a lot of these white so-called statistic websites give.
Yes. And I was saying in a previous video that I did about it, you have to be aware of exactly what polls they take, the sample size of the polls that they take, because they might ask 100 people and then say, oh, 75%. Well, yeah, of the 100 people, which was really small. And then this other poll
very small
might ask 1,000 or 2,000 people, and they get a very different percentage than what the original poll says. The thing is that the poll that you showed with the actual statistics breaking down not only the Asian American community, but also the ethnicity, shows that all of the ethnicities overwhelmingly support affirmative action, because they all know that they benefit from affirmative action. It's only a small amount of the Asian American community that are going against affirmative action. The issue with this is the fact that the Asians who are going against affirmative action, they're not getting pushback from the other Asian community that actually does support affirmative action. That's the problem.
That was very significant what you said, because I've taken data from Pew Research, AAPI, as well as common data sets, and it states that these acceptance rates for Asian Americans versus Black American applicants, they did a study. I'm sorry, they did some research back in 2022, and Asian Americans acceptance rates was at 28% versus Black Americans at 15%. So that means that Asian American applicants were more likely to be accepted to Ivy League, schools than Black Americans. And that margin is around 12.7%. So roughly 13% more that people are applying are getting into these Ivy League and prestigious schools over Black Americans. So the narrative that affirmative action is holding back or decreasing numbers that Asian Americans are being approved or getting granted into these Ivy League schools is a farce. It's a huge fat lie. And that's being propelled by the system of white supremacy. And again, it goes back to within that system, them so-called being the model minority and their likeness and being the buffer group of white supremacy, they accept their role. That's basically what I'm telling me. And this doesn't mean that all Asians are this way, but a significant number, whereas though, like you stated, there is no backlash from the Asian community on a large scale.
Yes, yeah.
Now, we do have some visual aids here, and I want to kind of get into what some Asian Americans are saying.
Ban on affirmative action earlier today is being marketed in the news as a win for the Asian American community. And I'm not quite sure about that. I'm just thinking in my situation, I really don't think this is a win for me. I have to remember that with a college like Harvard, the acceptance rate is around 5%, which means that most Asian Americans who apply don't get into Harvard. No matter how you slice and dice the admissions process, most Asian Americans who apply will never get into Harvard. Even if Harvard decided to reserve every single one of their spots to an Asian American person, even then, an Asian American who applies will most likely not get in. But up until now, if you didn't get into one of these Ivy League schools, you could have at least blamed it on affirmative action. You could be like, Mom, it wasn't my fault. It was affirmative action. My race held me back. But now, what are you gonna do? Huh? What are you gonna tell your mom? Worse yet, what is she gonna tell all her friends? You can't use affirmative action as a scapegoat anymore. She's going to have to admit to everyone around you that you really weren't good enough to get in.
Wow.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I respect the honesty. I respect that.
Absolutely.
When he brought up the numbers of the fact that just on average, this is a Ivy League school, on average, thousands of people apply to those, and majority of the time they get rejected. Most people who apply don't get in. That's just it. The thing is that they view it pretty much as almost 100% of the Asians who apply should get in, and that's just not how anything works.
That's true. That's very true. And that is the issue I think that we're facing, which is a much larger issue, not just their so-called scholastic achievement or that they're a smarter group than Black folk, is that a large portion of Asian Americans are applying to the Ivy League school. And so if a large portion of you guys are applying versus every other demographic, and there's a very small percentage of you guys not making it in, you feel as though affirmative action is allowing Black Americans to get in over you versus your scholastic achievements, your so-called merit, and your grade, your GPA averages, stating that, oh, we're smarter, so why are they getting in and we're not? Again, that goes back into that white supremacy narrative that Black people are stupid.
Mm-hmm. And not only that, college, when it comes to college admissions, a lot of times they factor in things more than just tests. They factor in, okay, I might have been the president of a tutor club, or I might have did a lot of community service. I might have been on this team, or whatever the case is. A lot of that stuff gets factored in as well too. They're viewing this as, okay, if I have a GPA of something, right? If I have a 4.1 GPA and this Black person has a 4.1 GPA, I should get in before the Black person. They believe that they have that privilege over the Black person. And if the Black person gets in over me, then that Black person got in because they were Black, not because of anything else. They're not there when they talk about merit. They're just looking at it like they automatically have more merit to be in these places than Black people. It's not like they're looking at the Black people who actually do get in. It's not like they're looking at their applications and comparing it to their applications and saying, well, my application was much better. Why did you get in over me? They don't know what the Black person had to go through to get into these schools.
Absolutely.
Their mind is just telling them this Black person is not qualified to be here. I'm qualified to be here. So whatever reason this Black person is here for, it can't be more legitimate than my reason. The only reason that Black person is there is because of affirmative action, is what they're telling themselves.
Before we get into another quick clip of Asian Americans actually dispelling the narrative that they don't benefit from affirmative action, I just want to say, when Asians come to this country, or if they're second or third generation, what I realize, and this goes for a lot of immigrant groups as well as even white Americans, they don't understand American history, which is Black American history as well.
Yes.
And they don't understand our achievements and all the the advances in technology, because I think a lot of times, if you don't know a people's history, then I think it's very easy to push white supremacist narratives on a group of people in order for them to believe one thing or another. I just had to throw that in, because I think a lot of times when you ask, we know the history of all these other groups, but they don't know our history. That's why, in my opinion, we are so more well-rounded than other groups because we've been so oppressed. We had to learn how to combat all of these so-called stereotypes and biases based upon our skin color. That's the way I look at it.
We have a respect, and we have an empathy for other people's struggles.
We do.
That people don't have for our struggle too.
Not at all.
Y'all. This is a misinformed opinion, and I've got data to back up my opinion. I'm Dr. Nellie, and I am a psychology researcher, and I've been studying Asian American psychology, especially subtle forms of bias in higher education and workplaces, for at least the last decade and a half. My work was cited in the UT Austin Supreme Court affirmative action case, and I'm also a signer on an amicus brief for the current Supreme Court affirmative action case. It's important to remember that when we're talking about affirmative action, we're asking for holistic admissions policies and employment policies. Without it, most places would go for test score only admissions. So what would that do? Let's look at the data. So we're looking at a study that came out in 2021 from Georgetown University. And under SAT only admissions, which is what was normally in place prior to affirmative action, Asian American applicants to selective colleges would gain fewer than 3,000 seats out of 120,000 seats. And this was in this report. Let me show you more. Here's what people are asking for. If we use test-based merit as the singular admissions requirement, the gain for Asian American applicants would be marginal. That's not statistically significant. But on the flip side, 21% of Asian American applicants who were previously admitted, affirmative action, holistic policies, would no longer qualify. People don't like to look at that. Holistic admissions helps everyone. It's not just a race-based matter. You actually have to understand what affirmative action actually is, and not just the shorthands that people are using. One of the expert testimonies that was submitted for this Supreme Court case was the UC system, and they showed how affirmative action negatively affected diversity and admissions for many groups here in California. We need to be careful here as well, because a lot of universities, and I've talked about this a lot in my other videos, a lot of universities internationalize their schools by bringing in very wealthy people from other countries, including Africa, the Middle East, Europe, and Asia. This is not who we're talking about when we're talking about affirmative action, a policy that was created for Americans disadvantaged in the US racial system. It is really disappointing that we are yet again, as an Asian American category, being wedged between groups and used as a model minority.
So I guess the big question is here, they know what's going on. They're using benign neglect tactics in order to push this narrative, because stereotypically Asians are supposed to be, superior in math than any other group. So maybe the statistics that she just displayed from her community, maybe that would be more convincing than us talking about it.
I agree. And the thing is, and this kind of segues us back to what we were talking about before, when we said, when colleges look at these admissions, they don't just factor in how well you take tests. That's
Correct.
what they're saying. Oh, well, our test scores, we're better when it comes to tests. We're statistically, especially when it comes to math, and it's really kind of only math, to be honest. It's not like math, English, literature. It's not really
science,
really math, right? To be honest, not even really science, like you said. It's just really math.
It is really math. Yeah.
They're like, we're better math test takers, and that should be the only thing that's qualified. But they want that to be the only thing that's accounted for when it comes to our application. When it comes to their application, they want all of the other stuff to be accounted for, such as the community work, such as social clubs,
community activist work,
events, all of these other things. They want that. Also, as well, they want their struggles to be counted for as well. I grew up poor and I had to study, and my family came from here, and this. They want all of those things to be counted for when it comes to their applications, but they want only the statistics, only the math taking statistics to be counted for when it comes to our statistics as FBA. Math is just,
math is not the sole acceptance of any college, because they don't want robots, they want human beings, so to speak.
Yes.
So here's another Asian American who is actually speaking out against the rejection that the Supreme Court had put out, and she has some statistics as well.
I'm Asian American, and this will be controversial, but I hope you'll hear me out to the end. I attended Harvard twice, for undergrad and for business school, and I fully support affirmative action and need to address this false narrative that Asians don't want affirmative action. I resent my race being hijacked to make a case for ending diversity. The Asian American admissions experience has been a primary focus of the current Supreme Court lawsuit, which I really resent because it's been orchestrated by Edward Bloom, a white man who has a track record of wanting to end diversity and inclusion in other areas of American life as well. He initially took a white plaintiff before to the Supreme Court against the University of Texas and failed. And so he decided he needed Asian plaintiffs, and so he advertised for them. And now Asian Americans are being used as a wedge against other communities of color. The Harvard Asian American Association and the Asian Alumni Association are both pro-affirmative action. Harvard cannot create a campus that is diverse enough to fulfill its educational mission without considering race as just one factor among many factors. I mean, we've seen massive declines in minority admissions at universities when affirmative action is eliminated. And higher education in these institutions are pipelines to leadership in our society, a society that's still, unfortunately, far from equal and just, one that still has a lot of work to do to close racial disparities and combat systemic racism, one that all of that became painfully clear for this nation with the Black Lives Matter movement. There are racial disparities in education going back centuries in this country, and today, if you're Black, you are more likely to be in an under-resourced school, but also more likely to be viewed as having less academic potential. I mean, yes, in an ideal world, race wouldn't be considered in admissions because in that ideal world, everyone would have access to the same kinds of resources and there'd be no systemic racism. But that is unfortunately not the world yet that we live in today. So what can we do now? I mean, it unfortunately does seem inevitable that affirmative action will be struck down this year. So what's the point of all of this? For one, I think it's important for Asian Americans to speak out versus just simply being used as a pawn in a political battle. I'm also surprised that more people generally aren't speaking out, again, given higher education's then trickle-on impact on future employment opportunities, income potential, leadership roles. This also shows how much voting matters. Please vote in the midterms next week. Early voting has started. Lawmakers have the power to reverse things like the impact.
Well, I would definitely say that unfortunately this video is a little bit behind where she said, they should get out there and speak against it, which didn't really occur. There was some as the proceedings were occurring that spoke out against it, but not the numbers that we saw from the AAPI data.com, where 70% roughly of Asian Americans are actually favoring affirmative action. So within their community, this large portion of people are supporting affirmative action, where the narrative seems to be, again, by the white media structure, propelling certain people that they put in place to speak against it, because they know either way it's going to undermine Black people. They know this.
Yeah. Yes. And what she's saying is, now, I'm not sure exactly when she made that video. She must have made it before they struck it down, because she was talking as if that was something that they were going to do. She wasn't referring to it as a past tense. She was referring to it as a future tense. So she was probably warning people with that video. But the thing is that, as you said, majority of their community really didn't get on board. You can cherry pick a very small percentage who actually spoke out against it, but majority of them, even though they support affirmative action, even though they recognize the benefits of affirmative action, majority of them still did not say anything, still kind of went along with the rhythm of the people who were going ahead with trying to dismantle affirmative action.
That's what they were doing. They were like, don't say nothing. Don't say nothing. Because I think it's important, because I did a video, I think last week, that Asians need to remember their history in America as well. And this gentleman here had pointed out some systemic racism that Asians has actually experienced in America, and that essentially, they're still being used. not in the same manner that they once done, because during this era, during the Chinese Exclusion Act, they had Chinatowns, but that included Koreans and Japanese as well. You had black towns, and then you had Irish towns as well. They discriminated against a lot of these groups, but mostly black and Asian at this time. So I'll let this video play and we do some commentary afterwards.
Hey, it's your neighborhood public defender here. This one goes out to the Asians. So a while back ago, a particular public defender's office got in trouble because it was known that during jury selection they were kicking out a lot of Asians, because even amongst the Asian public defenders and attorneys, it was just assumed that those Asians are typically racist against blacks. And there's truth to this, okay? Now, my message today is to the Asians who find themselves in the political right today, whether it's on affirmative actions or other issues, or they like to, talk about, hey, how come, the poor Asians get good grades? Why can't these other groups get their stuff together? And they're so arrogant and condescending. And behind closed doors, I know for a fact that they are pretty fucking racist. And I want to ask you, man, you think your rights come from the Constitution? Huh? You ever look at the history of this country and see how we're treated? You ever look up the Chinese Exclusion Act? You ever look at why they wouldn't allow those, early Chinamen to come here to build railroads? They can't bring the women because they didn't want us to breed and reproduce. But how come you ain't gonna ride on the back of the bus today? Why do you get to vote? Why do you have rights that white people have? It's not because of Lao Tzu or Confucius. That's a lot of black people. A lot of getting hit with the baton and getting chewed at by dogs. A lot of blood, sweat, and quite frankly, death and lynching. See, Black History Month, it's also a history about how we get our rights. So next time you want to get on your high horse, okay, and look down on other people, think about it, man. They had to do that for us, okay? And we often don't realize it or don't appreciate it.
Wow, that was powerful. Because not because he's Asian and saying it, but a lot of times people need to see themselves speaking the truth versus other groups speaking the truth to them about a particular thing. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts is the fact that, and like I said before with the other video, I respect the honesty, because what he said was honest. A lot of people look at the Civil Rights Act as if that the whole movement, not the act, I'm sorry, but the whole movement, right. Like this whole movement progressed black people. We weren't able to, or it really hindered the amount of discrimination in housing and hindered the amount of discrimination in workforce and all that, in voting rights and all that. But we a lot of times don't give ourselves enough credit to say the work and sacrifice, and like he said, death and lynching, all of these things that we have done, that by proxy helped everybody else, by proxy of the struggle that black people led the charge with, that black people led, that black people sacrificed, that black people fought for, that black people were beaten and took the brunt of. Everybody else by proxy benefited from that, because they didn't have. Now, they were never the targets like we were the targets. I mean, the Asian community weren't. But the thing is that they weren't treated like white people. They were not sitting up there benefiting like the white person was. They
Absolutely.
were discriminated as well too. White people didn't like them like that either. They limited the amount of immigration that they had over here as well too. They limited where they could work. They limited what they can do. They limited all of that stuff. It was really us breaking all of the racist barriers that allowed them to, by proxy of our win, to benefit from. They
Absolutely.
weren't allowed to sit in the front of the bus. We talk about how black people weren't, but they were. If a white person told an Asian to get to the back of the bus, the Asian would have to get to the back of the bus as well.
Absolutely.
Our sacrifice is what allows them to sit anywhere on the bus as well too. And when they don't understand the history, they don't have that appreciation. They came over here like, okay, why are you complaining about racism, instead of really kind of appreciating the fact that these are the people that, first off, the only reason this is a country in the first place, let's be real. Second off, the only reason that you are in the country in the first place, or second place, I would say. And then thirdly, the only reason you have any rights in this country whatsoever is because of us. The reason why you all, and based off of the statistics and the data, the reason why you all are this minority that's going to these Ivy League schools, that's going to these colleges, that are getting these jobs, is because of our sacrifice. We set the stepping stones that they are walking on, and then they turn back and they wag their finger and say, we did it, why can't you?
I recall speaking with an Asian American, and he was trying to tell me about Asian American history and how Asians built the railroad. And I was like, well, the foundation was built by Black Americans. And first and foremost, we built the first railroad system in America back in the 1830s. And between the North Carolina and South Carolina region, we built the first railroad. Asian Americans then started building to around the late 50s, early 60s in the 1800s. So a lot of times it's important for us to know our own history to debunk and deflect some of these lies that other groups put on us. Like, again, they're the so-called model minority.
First of all, no racial group is a monolith. There are Asians who study hard, there are Asians who don't. There are Black people who study hard, and there are Black people who don't. And second of all, can we take a step back and recognize how ridiculous it is to compare racial groups in a country that have completely different backgrounds and histories? But in the US, among high selectivity immigrants, African immigrants actually have a higher education level than East Asian immigrants, and in particular Nigerian immigrants have a higher education level than Chinese and South Korean immigrants. So it has nothing to do with Asian or Black. But do you know why we started comparing Asians and Black people in the United States? It's because in the 1950s and 60s, when the United States was engaging in military actions in Korea, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, bringing democracy to Asia and fighting against communism, as the civil rights movement gained in momentum and attention, people around the world started wondering, with all of the racism and injustice in the United States, who are Americans to go to any other country and tell them how to be? So the United States said, no, Chinese Americans and Japanese Americans are being great. You can look. They're not protesting. They're quiet, they're working hard, they're living their lives, and they're doing fine. The problem is the loud, angry, protesting Black people.
Yeah, like the Black people die for it.
And do you notice how the model minority myth only ever goes in one direction to make Black people look bad? Because let's take the model Asian who studies really hard. Do you know who else they're studying much harder than? White people. In 2021, among 18 to 24-year-olds, college enrollment among Asian Americans was 60%, among white people it was 38%, and among Black people it was 37%. So among white and Black people, it was about the same. But struggling white people do not get told you would be doing better if you were more like Asian Americans with their strong family values and their emphasis on academics. As a matter of fact, when Asians get compared to white people, Asian success is an indication that Asians are stealing opportunities and resources from white people and that we don't belong here.
Wow. She said a mouthful of very powerful stuff in the information, because again, there are some of them out there trying to debunk this, myth that they oppose affirmative action, while majority of them actually favor, and they're understanding the propaganda that's coming out of the white media structure, making them a model minority and being very divisive. Now, I don't really call for us joining hands, kumbaya, and walking down the street or anything like that. But God damn it, the more that you speak out against some of the rights that our forefathers fought for, is actually going to hurt you. And we looked at one of the statistical videos. She was basically saying that because of affirmative action, 21% of more Asians were accepted into these universities and colleges. If you, as they already done, struck down affirmative action, we're going to see a significant drop in Asian Americans attending a lot of these colleges. And guess what? I don't care, because they never really, helped Black people in the first place to get in some of these colleges anyway. I mean, the way I look at it, they're not going to understand it until it smacks them in the face.
Yes. And now what's interesting, because me and you are both on the same page. We're not really trying to be all like, look, we have an ally. Right. We're not trying to do that, but we are trying to show, because we're dispelling the narrative that most Asians feel this way. Because
Correct.
The whole thing, we have to understand, this is a plot of white supremacy. This is what
Absolutely.
This is in the previous video, the other lady said this, the younger one. She said that they had went to try to disband affirmative action before. It was a group of white people who did it, and they failed. So they used an Asian face to be the poster person of getting rid of affirmative action. They put Asians at the front of their campaign to get rid of affirmative action, and the Asians acquiesced to that, and the Asians went along with that, and they became the face of the, what I think is Fair Admissions Act, or Fair Admissions.
Yeah, Fair Admissions Act. Yeah, we'll go with that.
Yeah. They became the face of that, but it's a white puppet master playing with the strings behind all of that. They know that. They are just being allowed because they understand that they're the buffer class. They've really surrendered psychologically and morally to white supremacy. So they're like, okay, well, they said to do it, so we're going to do it. So they became the faces. So that way you can say, well, it's not racist. They're a minority as well, too. And they say they want to get rid of it. You know what I'm saying? Because you can't put a white person in front of it because it looks too obvious. And now in this system we're in now, they want to hide their hands, and they use the buffer classes, which is why it's so important to them. They use the buffer class to say, well, Asians, hey, hold on, they're a minority too. They want to get rid of it. So it's not a race thing. You can't say it's a race thing. They want to do it that way. You know, so it
reminds me of Black Democratic shields. You know that, right? It reminds me of Black Democratic shields that supposedly speak for all Black people. But we know they're paying for bootlicks, but they are the ones who get the media coverage, just like that one Asian guy that we were showing the video earlier, that is so-called speaking for the Asian community and giving the narrative that, this is what majority of Asians want, versus when you look at the data and numbers, even when we look at these Black Democratic shields, you see people in your state, in your city, speaking out against all these immigrants. They're being dropped off because you guys will label a sanctuary city, but majority of the sanctuary cities are Black states or heavily populated Black cities in the area. So I look at that just as these guys being shields of the white supremacist culture that we have in America. And they're speaking for an entire group that opposes the narrative that, hey, we really don't care about affirmative action, but they actually favor affirmative action.
Yes. And another thing as well, too, brother, is the fact that notice how the Asian that was against affirmative action, notice how he was the one who was on the mainstream platform.
Correct.
Those other ones,
TikTok.
the other ones that are speaking out and saying no, what the real data is, what the real history is, they don't get to be on the mainstream platform. They only allow certain people who are the buffer classes of those, like, okay, I'll pick you and you'll be the face of the represent, the same way they do with us. They'll take, okay, well, I'll have Al Sharpton be the face of Black people. I'll have Jim Clyburn, he'll be the representative, or whatever the case. And we'll have the representatives of what is Black society. They'll be their hand-picked folks, just like with the Asian community. The Asian community is like, no, not enough, mind you, not enough of them are saying it, but the ones who are saying it, they won't get that platform because the white power structure is cherry picking which Asians are going to go along with what they tell them to. These Asians are damn near reading a script that was given to them by the white power structure.
You know, they do this. They have these pre-panels. I've actually been on a pre-panel before when they have topics that they want to broadcast to the nation. They do a pre-panel. So they call people and they record those too. They call people and they ask them, particular questions, and then you answer the questions or whatever. They may or may not even pay you or whatever. It just depends on, the topic or what the narrative they're trying to push. And then, like you stated, they cherry pick those. Hey, Chair 2, Chair 6, we want you guys to stay behind. Those are the ones that go on the mainstream media because they're trying to propel a particular narrative to push the rhetoric of whatever topic, they're spewing at the time. Now, I went to collegevine.com to get some more numbers here of the, ethnic and racial backgrounds that people are getting accepted to these Ivy League schools like Brown, Columbia, Cornell, Dartmouth, Harvard, Princeton, UPenn, and Yale. And you see that we're even behind Hispanic Americans, okay? So you have whites, majority of the population in America. They're at Brown at 40%. I'll just use Brown as the example. Asians at 18%, Hispanics at 11%, and Black Americans at 7%. Okay, and then even the international students are more than Black Americans at 12%. So people who are not even part of this country are getting highly accepted, almost twice the amount than we are. So again, it's not like affirmative action is assisting and supporting the so-called equality that it was devised for Black Americans originally. Today, it never really benefited us. And you look at other statistics, it benefits more white people or more white women than it ever did Black people. So again, we have to look at these narratives and statistics that, again, some of these are fudged in nature. You just really got to dive deep and do a lot of correlating factors in order to get this information.
Yes.
When I also look at a news story that came out by the New York Times, I didn't pay for the little dollar there. I'm not paying for that bull crap. But the headline speaks for itself. It says, ruling may mean a sharp drop in Black and Latino students based on race-conscious college admission at the state level. So basically, they're already stating that, hey, that narrative that you guys believe that affirmative actions were actually hurting you, oh, now that it's been struck down, it's now going to hurt you. That's what we're predicting. And that's coming from New York Times.
Yes. Now, what's interesting is the previous stats that you brought up about them, the whites being accepted from at Brown specifically. I'm just talking about that. 40% compared to their 18%.
Right.
That's a very, very big difference. It's a very wide gap between the whites and everybody else. Okay. So they're looking at, is a huge majority of them are looking at that. Now they're twice the number because we were 7%. They're 18. So they're over twice the number that we were. Okay. And they're looking behind, they're looking back towards us and saying, look at that 7%. That's too high. Instead of looking at that 40% and saying, what about the legacy emissions? How many of that 40% are legacy emissions? How many of that 40% cheated to get in there? But they're looking at the 7% and saying they shouldn't be there.
I'm glad you broke up legacy, because I looked at this article here and it stated that it's estimated that anywhere from 25 to 35% of admitted students at Ivy League schools come from a family with legacy status. That's a major thing for education institutions that accept fewer than 10% of the students who apply. And we kind of look at the numbers. I did a range where it says anywhere from 3.41% to 7%, and that kind of lands on 5% of the total amount of people that apply to these Ivy League schools that get accepted, only 5%. Now, within that 5%, we're looking at the 18%, for our example, for Brown, that Asian Americans actually receive. But when it comes to legacy, this is another form of discrimination to non-white people, because regardless of their scholastic achievements, their merit, their GPA, what level of high school they graduated on, they're simply getting admitted because a family member went there, or they're a big pocket donor, or they're a recruited athlete. That has nothing to do with their scholastic achievements. So when we look at legacy and all the things that entail in the legacy admission, that's discriminatory at best. But instead of attacking that, they attack affirmative action.
And it's a higher level of discrimination. They would get their numbers if they really cared about getting their numbers in administrations up. If they really cared about getting their rates of administration up, they would go after that. That's the thing that's holding them back, not affirmative action. Affirmative action is, and by all data, is showing affirmative action is actually boosting them up. Affirmative action is not holding them back at all. The legacy admissions that we were just talking about, that's holding all non-white people back. That's holding every single last one of them back. But the thing is, they are not going for the legacy admissions. They're not saying, well, just because your mom and dad donated to this school or went to this school, that doesn't make your merit any higher than my merit. Or just because you were a star athlete on a high school football team, that doesn't make your merit higher than my merit because you're 6'2" and I'm 5'3". That doesn't, and that's mean, but that doesn't make your merit higher than my merit. You know what I'm saying? But they're not challenging that because they view that, okay, that's white people stuff. We leave that alone. Okay.
Right.
Black people stuff, we can go after them. They're easy targets or whatever. And this is something that the dominant society has allowed when they allow buffer classes. They allow buffer classes to kind of deflect from their racism, to use them as the puppets, and they be the puppet master. And as a benefit of that, the buffer class feels as if I can attack black people too. I can't attack the puppet master, but I can attack black people as well too.
Absolutely. And when you look at legacy admissions, they are a form of affirmative action, because if you look at the practice, it has been criticized for discriminating against Black Americans who are less likely to have alumni in their families, because legacy admissions are a form of affirmative action, that gives preferential treatment to the children of alumni in the college admission process. The practice has been criticized for discriminating against, Black Americans who are less likely to have alumni in their family, because when we look at all the different reasons why legacy admissions are seen as discriminatory, in which is discriminatory to Black Americans, we have to look at the alumni of the Ivy League schools are disproportionately white. The alumni is disproportionately white. So if you looked at, it was a Columbia undergraduate law review, they stated that 90% of all living Ivy League alumni were white. And what that means is that legacy admissions are more likely to benefit white applicants than Black applicants. And then second, legacy admissions give an unfair advantage to applicants who are already privileged, right? The children of alumni are more likely to come from more wealthier families than Black people. They come from better schools than Black people, and they have more connections in that arena, in that sector, than Black people. So that gives them an advantage over Black people who are applying for these schools that have particular backgrounds. And then thirdly, legacy admissions perpetuate racial inequality by giving an advantage to white applicants that have legacy admissions help to maintain racial status quo at these so-called Ivy League schools. This is because white students are already overrepresented at these schools, and legacy admissions make it even harder for Black students to be admitted. Now, you can go out and research this stuff on all these different websites, but I looked at the Princeton Review, right? They published an annual report on college admissions. And the one that came out this year found that the acceptance rate for legacy applicants in these Ivy League schools was 33% compared to an overall acceptance rate of 6.7%, right? We're still kind of dealing within that 3.4 to 7% margin, but they stated that 6% of the overall acceptance rate was from these legacy applicants. And that means that legacy applicants are more than 5 times likely to be admitted to Ivy League schools than non-legacy applicants. So basically, when we talk about legacy Afro Elite, we're talking about affirmative action for white people.
That's deep. And the thing that's deep. This brother is deep. Okay, that's really deep, and that's very important. And nobody's really talking about that.
No,
they talk about affirmative action as if that's holding them back. Here's the thing: the white power structure is so deep rooted in the minds of everybody that's discriminatory against certain white people.
Correct.
That's discriminatory because all white people don't have alumni in their families. You know what I'm saying? But you don't even see white people saying, hey, we got to get rid of this. This isn't fair, because their whole thing is that they would rather suffer injustice. They would rather suffer things not being fair as long as things are more unfair for Black people.
Absolutely.
It's sick. It's evil, but that's really how they think. They understand that is discriminatory against them. A lot of them, because only, like you said, only a few of them have alumni parents, have alumni ties and connections and things like that, and they get overwhelmingly picked and overwhelming support and privileges over everybody else beneath them, but they're not going to challenge that, because for them to challenge things that are unequal, for them to challenge things that are unfair and unjust, means that they are going to have to completely do that across the board. And they can't do that across the board because they know if it's unfair for me, it's more unfair for the Black people, and I would rather have it that way.
I was just thinking, there was some information that came out either early this year or late last year that a lot of these Ivy League schools, one, were built by our ancestors. And then two, some of them even house slaves. I was really trying to find it as you were speaking, brother, because I think that's an important thing too. So part of these schools are part of our culture in the sense that we built these schools. And I'm not saying that should give us, a leg up, but at the same time,
why not?
That's the way I'm kind of looking at it, because a lot of these things are going unsaid, because the legacy thing, I really thought that it's a reason why certain narratives were propelled and promoted more so than these other narratives, right? I'm kind of looking at this still, and let me see if this is it. It states here that among the findings in the 134-page report conducted by Harvard president, faculty, and staff enslaved more than 70 people in the 17th and 18th century, some of whom labored on campus. Harvard continued to benefit from donations from plantation owners and other trade involving slave labor. So the information is there. And again, could I say that our forefathers worked for us to go to these schools, even though at the same time, I didn't, I've been to Harvard. Okay, I've been to Harvard. I didn't attend Harvard. I just kind of been on campus.
I've been on the property,
Yeah. I walked on there for historical reasons. Yeah, but I didn't even apply to Harvard. Okay, but nonetheless, I just feel as though, I know as though that if we don't dispel a lot of these narratives and have other people to understand that this is white supremacy at its best, right? They understand that they are the minority in the world. And if they can devise groups amongst each other, they can divide groups among themselves and have people to infight, not only within your own race and your own culture, but also to infight with other people. Everyone's being oppressed. The system of white supremacy is global, and they've been doing this for hundreds of years. They have been tried, tested, and they know exactly what they're doing. And I just feel as though the vast majority of people are not waking the hell up. And that's why this whole narrative of anti-woke, and none of these people really know what woke is. That's something that came out in the late 70s, early 80s about what woke is, that, our Foundational Black American Family came up with, for us to understand the systemic racism and how we're being attacked on all fronts, even by our own people who benefit from the so-called straps of the master's table. So when I look at this, I'm just like, God damn it, we have to understand the construct of this so-called white supremacy matrix that were created for us to be oppressed and to essentially not be successful in.
Yes. The areas, like our brother Neely Fuller Jr. would put it, the 9 areas of people activity. Okay,
right.
That includes, and that education is a part of that. Education's a part of that. Economics are a part of that. Labor are a part of that. All of, and I'm not gonna. Those are just a few of them who are all of those areas. So when we came up, if we go to the term woke, that was pretty much an awakening to understand how all of these areas of people activity are affected from the perspective of white supremacy, how they control all of these things to use against Black society. So when you wake up, because the thing is that it's not like they tell you, you have to learn for yourself. And that's when you kind of have a better perspective of how the world works. So that's what we meant by that. Now that term woke has been flipped to what they pretty much say, irrational hatred against, I guess, white people or whatever the case is. That's kind of in the context of how they use it, even though they don't really give a definition to it. But in the context of how they use it, that's how they use it.
You brought up Neely Fuller and made me think, as you were stating, the 9-10 areas of human activity that white supremacy controls and operates. It also made me think about Francis Cress Welsing, how they
Yes.
believe the black male is going to annihilate the white race, okay, through heterosexual intercourse because of our strong genes. It also made me it made me think about a lot of things, but I kind of want to recall those 10 areas of people activity so the people can see these areas that white supremacy not only operates in, but essentially controls, right? And you stated some of the major things: economics, education, but as well as entertainment, labor law, politics, religion, sex, war, and health. Because think about it like this. I look at Afro Elite's channel. I look at Torian Rain Reloaded. I look at Tariq Nasheed, Professor Black Truth, TD Hip Hop Media. I look at all these people who are encouraging Black people not only to wake up, but giving them the information and their history, to be empowered. I even look at what's the guy's name? Dr. Forgot the gentleman's name. He wears glasses. He gives financial information as well. Dr. Boyce Watkins, right? So I look at all of these people. I study them. I research them, their message, and what they're doing for the Black community, right? All this is empowering information. But majority on social media, what takes over, right? Entertainment, not infotainment. That's a little bit of entertainment as well as information, but entertainment. And look at the debauchery that they propel at the forefront, because that is the narrative they want to show how majority of Black Americans are. That coincides with all the other areas of activity. If I can show the world that these so-called Black people, these animals, look how they treat themselves, look how they show themselves on social media doing this, that, and the other. They don't propel channels like yours or mine, right? I look at some people's channels, I'm looking at the subscribers, I'm looking at the comments. They are enjoying this because this is what gets promoted versus empowering information that not only can save our lives, but the descendants that we'll be having after us. So, I mean, that was very powerful that you brought up Millie Fuller, because as soon as you said it, I was like, oh yeah, the 10 areas of human activity. And this is what white supremacy have been controlling ever since the mid 1400s, when you do the history on it.
Exactly. And the thing is, if you don't understand that, like he said, if you don't understand white supremacy, what it is and how it works, everything that you do understand will only confuse you. When you look at those 10 areas of, they say human activity, people activity, I know it's kind of interchangeable,
right?
But when you look at those 10 areas and you understand that's pretty much all of life.
That's life.
That's everything of life. You can fit everything in life really in those 10 categories.
They said law's the Constitution. That's why they can abide by the Constitution or deflect the Constitution. That's just like in your video yesterday, how a Black cop received this wake-up call where the white police female officer had her foot inside of this lady's door, which goes against the Constitution, right? You don't have a warrant. You can't just go in and barge in someone's home. That's against the Constitution. You don't have a warrant. She stated that they had probable cause because somebody got stabbed, that they wanted to see a particular person. I'm sorry. Am I mixing the two stories up? But that's the same story. I think I'm mixing up two stories.
That's not what I talked about yesterday.
My apologies. You're referring to the gentleman who thought he was going to have some help with the officer because when he stated he was a police officer. My apology. This was another video I saw that a white police officer had her foot over the threshold of a lady's house, a Black lady's house, and was calling for someone to come to the door to see if they were stabbed. And when the person came to the door, they wasn't stabbed. And they were like, well, we want everybody to come out the house. And then basically they just barged in, violating their Second Amendment rights. So my apologies for getting those videos mixed up. But by the way, that was a great video you did yesterday.
Thank you. I appreciate
think people should go check that out as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. And that's the thing. The law is what they say the law is. When we look at the situation with the Tulsa, Oklahoma, the survivors of the Tulsa, Oklahoma massacre, and them being denied their reparations.
Reparations, yeah.
legally, there's no grounds why they should be denied or the case should be dismissed with prejudice. Our good brother Professor Black Truth did a video essay on talking about that. That's
Right.
really just I'm white and I say so with the law.
That's why
The
them say
law is
so.
one thing this way, the law is another thing this way. The law says police can't kill unarmed people. That's what the law says. Police are not supposed to do it. Police do it all the time and they get off. We see that time and time again. So the law is what they say the law is. When the law applies to them, when they want it to apply to them, that's in the
Like
area of
qualified
people
immunity.
activity. So this is what I say when people are like, I know my rights. I know you can't do this. You can't talk to me like this. I'm a, but all of that stuff. You don't understand the areas of people activity, because if you did, you would understand the law doesn't apply in this situation right now.
And it definitely don't apply to you.
Yes.
You know, it doesn't apply to them. Let them white people invoke their rights. But I like what you said yesterday, because I've said it. I think I said it in one of my videos a couple of years ago. I just said, shut your damn mouth.
Yes.
Just shut up. Because you will make matters worse thinking you know something that you don't really know and thinking that you actually have rights. The best defense you have is not saying anything at all. If you're going to lock me up, do what you got to do, right? But showing attitude, emotions, that is going to make the situation worse. That's why, I mean, I agree with you 100% on your side. Again, I encourage people to go out and see that video. That was very, very informative. I enjoyed it thoroughly. Now, as we're coming to a close here, do you have any other comments on the subject for today? Also, let people know about your social media channel, Afro Elite.
Okay, well, I want to thank you for bringing me here. I appreciate this. This was
My
very
pleasure,
educational. To talk on the subject today, I feel like this is a really good breakdown, because this exposes the narrative that, first off, us as foundational Black Americans and anything that we do get holds anybody back. Because the thing is that when you actually calculate all of the factors, all of what they say are merit, because they are like, oh, you should only get in based off your merit. You're merit, as if they have this overwhelmingly spectacular merit that nobody else can compete with. Nobody else can come our peers to. Nobody else is equal to. All right. When you calculate all of that, just like how the statistics in the data were showing, when you calculate the merit, their merit is not as great as they make it seem like it is. Okay. When you calculate the amount that they get in, and especially when you compare that to their actual population size, they're preferred over everybody, really, when you factor in their population size. All right. So nobody is holding them back. Only, as a matter of fact, they're really getting boosted by the model minority myth. And
you know
everything
what?
was better for them before.
I have one more clip to harp on what you said to solidify that. And we missed this, but let's just watch this video, because you said something very powerful about model minority that we definitely need to showcase here.
Indian immigrants from India, the country, and the ethnic group of Indians in America are crushing every other ethnic group in America, not by 5%, not by 10%, by 20% in income. We have stats on their divorce rates against everybody else. We have stats on how they raise their kids. We have stats on how they put their kids in certain majors over other majors. It's just mind-boggling, and everybody else is going to learn a ton about how Indians raise their kids.
All right, so this is about the Model Minority Olympics, and of course people of color understand that when they talk about Asians as model minorities, this is just the white racist way of divide and conquer. It's their way of giving, specifically black people the middle finger, right? That, look at these people who are completely fuck ups and they can't get their shit together. And if America is so racist, and how do you explain this other group? So these are the Asian boys gang. They're from Cambodia, and here is the point: you can't just compare people's results like that without considering sample size bias. That is, how did they get into this country? If there's a border crossing that allows their poor population to come over, that's going to be very different, right? And so imagine if India and America shares a border, and their homeless people get to come over here, right? Not their people with master's degree, or Dr. Patel or whoever, but they're poorest of the poor. And India's got a major homeless problem, right? That will skew the results. So that's what's happening with Asians, right? When we come over here, we fly over here, we have disposable income, so it looks the way it looks. So remember that Asian boys gang I showed you before? You know what gang is that? Cambodia. Okay, I'm a public defender, and when I get cases from Asians, it's Vietnamese and Cambodian. Nothing wrong with them. They're wonderful people. Don't get pissed on me. But my point is, think about it statistically, the selection process. So earlier that dude, that fucking dumb shit, that sounds like he's selling used cars. Not by 5%, not by 10%, whatever. Well, what about the India's poorest of the poor? Right? Suppose they were coming to America like people from, Honduras, right? Or Mexico, just crawling over the desert, not a dime in the pocket, no education. Okay, man, we would be flipping out. What are those numbers gonna look like? Okay, so calm the fuck down with this, racial Olympics, man. Like we are competing against each other. Don't fall for the model minority bullshit to make you feel good. Okay, that's what the mega people want. Damn.
What's your thoughts on that, brother?
Like I said, there was some good information, and I respect the honesty. The thing is that if everything was completely fair, if everything was everything, then we would be winning all of the time. We would be batting 100% of the time. The thing is that they select a very specific amount, a small specific amount of people who've made certain accomplishments to qualify to come to the country, and then they compare the ones who've made those accomplishments prior to coming to the country and then competing, and then they're looking at that percent, however big percent that is, they're comparing that to the entirety of Black society as a whole. And they're saying, okay, well, look at their income compared to your income. Okay, well, if it's like that, then look at their income in comparison to the white income, or whatever the case is. They don't ever say that any other group of people work harder than white people. These quote unquote people of color who get on these platforms and they're pushing this like the kind of alt-right, even though we know right and left are the same bird, but when they push the racism, systemic racism doesn't exist, the Rami, whatever his name is,
who are you talking about? Ramaswamy?
Yes, thank you. I forget his name all the time. When they push those narratives, they don't ever say we're better than white people. They don't ever say we have better culture than white people. They don't say that. They use that as a weapon against Black people, specifically against Black people, and say, we did it, why can't Black people? They don't take that energy, and they don't take that energy to the trailer parks, and they don't say, I'm an Indian and I did it, so why can't you as a white person, why can't you do it? They won't do that to white people, to poor white people, to disenfranchise white people, but they'll do that to disenfranchise Black people. And the thing is that you came over here, or your parents came over here because they met qualifications to come over here. It wasn't just anybody who wants to come to America comes to America. So if everything was everything, and you compared your best to the best, because that's the only ones who get to come over here, you compared your best to the best to our best to the best, you're not winning that competition. There's nothing that they are coming over here and doing that we have not already done before and set the stepping stones for them to do. We've already been doctors. We've already been lawyers. We've already been businessmen and businesswomen. We've already been judges. We've already been in Congress. We've already done all of these things that they're coming over here and wagging their finger and saying, if we can do it, why can't you?
I really want to show the numbers, brother. I really want to show the numbers because, again, it's important because, like you say, they're cherry picking groups that's in America, and a lot of these people already coming here affluent, right? So let's devise the real numbers here. When I look at the population of these countries, like China, 1.4 billion people, India, 1.3 billion people, and we can keep going on, but they were talking about specifically Indians at this point, right? There's an ethnic group within the Asian community. So 1.3 billion people. Okay, cool. and we start looking at the poverty rate of these countries, okay? The poverty rate of India is, when it comes to children, around 28%. When it comes to adults, is around 13%. When you add those numbers up, you get roughly around 41, 42% of your population is living in poverty, compared to Black Americans at only 19.5%.
Yes.
If people want to round up, let's say 20, want to round down, say 19, whatever, 19.5 versus 41%, that our two populations. And guess what? You have your own country. You're not being oppressed, but people are, there's classism here in India, but you're the same people. We are a small minority in America, which the white power structure, if you do white non-Hispanic, is around 67%. And if you do white Hispanic, is around 70% of the population. So again, you're taking this very small, minute, what Asians make up 9% of the American population, and within that 9%, only 2.5% of them are Indian, and you're using that number compared to all Black people or all Americans. That's very disingenuous. And a lot of times these people know how to engage their audience to a fact where the audience think they're speaking facts, but they never show you the numbers. They never show you.
Yes. And when they bring up the statistics, like you were saying, when they bring these statistics up, they bring it up out of context.
Correct.
You have to factor in all. First off, even if you want to, even if what they're saying is statistically true, you have to factor in a lot of the racial context as well too, because it's not like all minorities are equally held back. You know what I'm saying? It's not like that. It's not like the fact that when we all go to school, we get treated the same. When we apply for a job, we get treated the same. When we try to get a promotion, we get treated the same. When we try to buy a house, we get treated the same. When we try to buy a property, we get treated the same. Or start a business, we get treated the same. We don't.
We don't.
So when you look, even if you factor, even if everything was fair and what they're saying is statistically true, factor in the fact that when we apply for the business loan, we'll get denied, and you can get it off the same application. If I put Black on there, they're gonna deny that because I put the fact that I'm a Black person on that app. The same
put Indian on it.
Yeah, exactly. It's a lot of these cases. Y'all don't have the merit. It's not like y'all deserving of anything more. It's the fact that we are the targets. You are not the targets. So if they flip it's not like they flip a coin or anything like that. It's not like they choose the best. They're going to choose you all the time over us. The only time they choose us over them is when we are so much more qualified. We have to beat them pretty much in every category to be overly qualified in compared to what they get.
What really, kind of grinds my gears is that even, and again, we're speaking specifically about Indian Americans because he used it as an example.
Mm-hmm.
But I interviewed on my channel, I believe her name was Shweta Egrera. She was a British Indian woman who wrote a book called The Black Rose, and she was dispelling the discrimination and racism that Indians inherently have for Black people because of the system of white supremacy. Then also because of the system of white supremacy, colorism in India. Not only Nigeria, not only Jamaica, but India has a huge problem with skin bleaching addiction.
Yes.
Because they want to be closer to whiteness, because their own people discriminate upon themselves. Now, one point in time in America, because of racism, Jim Crow, we had the brown paper girls, we had all these groups, but you no longer see that in Black society where you're being discriminated upon because you're dark or because you're too light. We don't really have that anymore, but they're still having these issues through all these non-Black American cultures that we've dealt with a long time ago because we understood what the system of white supremacy does. So again, there's a lot of other nuances to this, brother. I'm gonna go ahead and let you lead off with your last comments and promoting your channel as well.
Well, definitely I feel like this whole thing, if you guys are catching this in like somewhat in the middle or whatever the case is, you definitely want to watch this entire thing. This entire thing has been loaded with much helpful information, much useful information, and information that fuels you. So when you hear these narratives, you know exactly the data and you know the talking points to combat these things from a very
Absolutely.
logical and truth based perspective. All right. So shout out to you, brother Blacklogic. I appreciate you having me here. And you all can follow me on YouTube. That's my main platform, which is Afro Elite on YouTube. Just Afro Elite on YouTube. Pretty much Afro Elite on everything else. Afro Elite on Instagram. The Afro Elite on Twitter. And then I started up the podcast thing too. So that's just Afro Elite on Spotify as well too.
Well, thank you, brother Afro Lee. I do appreciate your time and your intelligence. And I will advise all of you guys, go and promote this brother. Go and subscribe to his channel. He does really, really good commentary, informational pieces that I quite to enjoy as well. I ain't trying to rob nothing from you, brother. But anyway, but yeah, go and support that brother, support his channel. And we see you guys on the next one. Be one.